our next reading now on economics, the firm and market structures. Learning outcomes, describe characteristics of perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and pure monopoly. Explain a relationship between price, marginal revenue, marginal cost, and economic profit, and the elasticity of demand under each market structure. Describe a firm's supply function under each market structure. Describe and determine the optimal price and output for firms under each market structure. Explain factors affecting long-run equilibrium price under market structure. Describe pricing strategy under each market structure. Describe the use of limitations of concentration measures in identifying market structure. And identify the types of market structure within which a firm operates. Introduction. The purpose of this reading is to build an understanding of the importance of market structures as different market structures result in different sets of choices facing a firm's decision makers. An understanding of market structure is a powerful tool in analyzing issues such as the firm's pricing of its product and more broadly its potential to increase profitability in the long run. In the long run, firm's profitability will determine by the forces associated with the market structure within which it operates. In a highly competitive market, long-run profits will be driven down by the forces of competition. In less competitive markets, large profits are possible even in the long run. In the short run, any outcome is possible. Therefore, understanding the forces behind the market structure will aid the financial analyst to determine firms' short and long-term prospects. Section 2 introduces the analysis of market structure. This section addresses questions such as what determines the degree of competition associated with each market structure. Given the degree of competition associated with each market structure, what decisions are left to the management team developing corporate strategy? How does a chosen pricing and output strategy evolve into specific decisions that affect the probability of the firm? The answers of these questions are related to the forces of the market structure within which the firm operates. Section 3, 4, 5, and 6 analyzes demand, supply, optimal price, and output. Factors affecting long-run equilibrium and perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and pure monopoly, respectively. Section 7 reviews techniques of identifying the various forms of market structures. For example, there are accepted measures of market concentration that are used by regulators of financial institutions to judge whether or not a planning merger or acquisition will harm the competitive nature of regional banking markets. Financial analysts should be able to identify the type of market structures a firm is operating within. Each different structure implies a different long-run sustainability of profits. A summary of the practice problem concludes the reading. Part 2, analysis of market structures. Traditionally, economists classifies a market into 4 structures: perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. Section 2.1 explains the 4 ways classifications is in more detail. Section 2.2 completes the introduction by providing the example of major points to evaluate and determining the structure of which to which a market belongs. 2.1 Economists 4 types of structure. Economists defines a market as a group of buyers and sellers that are aware of each other and are able to agree on a price for the exchange of goods and services. While the internet has exceeded a number of markets around the world, extended the number of markets around the world, certain markets are limited by geographic boundaries. For example, the internet search engines such as Google operates in a worldwide market. In contrast, the market for premix cement is limited to an area within which a truck can deliver the machine mix from a plant to a construction site before the compound becomes useless. Thomas L. Fieldman, international bestseller of The World is Flat, challenges the concept of the geographic limitations of the market. If the service being provided by the seller can be digitalized, its market expands worldwide. For example, the technicians can scan your injuries in a clinic in Switzerland. The radiographic image can be digitized and sent to a radiologist in India to be read as a consumer, i.e. the patient. You may never know that part of the medical service provided to you was the result of a worldwide market. Some markets are highly concentrated, with the majority of total sales coming from a small number of firms. For example, the market for small consumer batteries. 3 firms control 87% of U.S. markets: Duracell 43, Energizers 33, and Rivarock 11%. As of 2005, other markets are fragmented, such as automobile repairs, where small independent shops often dominate. The large chains may or may not exit. Now products can lead to market concentration. It is estimated that the Apple iPod had a world market share of over 70% among MP3 players in 2009. That's so long ago, but not really at the same time. The importance of market structure, considering the evolution of television broadcasting as the market environment of television broadcasting evolved, the market structure changed, resulting in a new set of challenges and choices. So this is just an example of that. Market structure can be broken down into 4 distinct categories: perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. We start with the most competitive environment, the perfect competition. Unlike some economic concepts, perfect competition is not merely an ideal based on assumptions. Perfect competition is a reality. For example, it serves commodities in several commodities market where sellers and buyers have a strictly homogeneous product and no single producer is large enough to influence market price. Perfect competition's characteristics are well recognized and its long run outcome unavoidable. Profits under this condition of perfect competition are driven to the required rate of return paid by the entrepreneur to borrow capital from investors, so-called normal profits or rental costs of capital. This does not mean that all perfectly competitive industries are doomed to extinction by a lack of profits. On the contrary, millions of businesses do very well, are living under the pressure of perfect competition. Monopolistic competition is also highly competitive. However, it is considered a form of imperfect competition. Two economists, Edward H. Chamberlain, U.S., and Joanne Robinson of the U.K., identify this hybrid market and came up with the term because there are strong elements of competition in this market structure and also some monopoly-like conditions. This is the sellers can convince consumers that its products is uniquely different from others similar products, and that the sellers, Okay. The oligopoly market structure is based on a relatively small number of firms supplying the market. Now, a small number of firms in the market means that each firm may consider that retaliatory strategies the other firms will pursue. With prices or production levels changes, consider the pricing behavior of commercial airline companies. Pricing strategies and route scheduling are based on expected reactions of other carriers in similar markets. For any given route, say Paris to France to Chennai to India, only a few carriers are in competition. If one of the carriers changes its pricing package, others will likely retaliate. Understanding the market structure of oligopoly markets can help in identifying a logical pattern of strategic price changes for the competing firms. Finally, the last competitive market structure is monopoly. In pure monopoly markets, In pure monopoly markets, there are no other good substitutes for the given product or service. There is a single seller, which, if allowed to operate without constraint, exercises considerable power over pricing and output decisions. Okay. Factors that determine market structure. The number and relative size of firms supplying the product, the degree of product differentiation, the power of sellers over pricing decisions, the relative strength of barriers to market entry and exit, and the degree of non-price competition. The number of relative size of firms in market influences market structure. If there are many firms, the degree of competition increases, which with fewer firms supplying a good or service, consumers are limited to in their markets choices. One exam case is the monopoly market structure, with one firm supplying a unique good or service. Another extreme is the perfect competition, with many firms supplying a similar product. Finally, an example of a relatively sized automobile industry with a small number of large internationally produced, e.g. Ford and Toyota, as the leaders of the global market. The number of small companies either have market power because they are niche players, e.g. Ferrari, or have limited market power because there are narrow range models with limited geographic presence, such as this. In the case of monopolistic competition, there are many firms providing products to the market. As with perfect competition, however, one firm's products is differentiated in some way that makes it appear better than similar products from other firms. If a firm is successful in differentiating its product, its differentiation will provide pricing leverage. The more the similar the product appears, the more the market will resemble the monopoly market structure. A firm can differentiate its product through aggressive advertising campaigns, frequent styling changes, the linking of its product with others, complementary products, and a host of other methods. When the market dictates price based on aggregate supply, the demand conditions, the individual firm has no control over pricing. The typical hog farmer in Nebraska and a milk producer in Bavaria are price takers. That is, they must accept whatever price the market dictates. This is the case under the market structure of perfect competition. In the case of monopolistic competition, the success of products differentiation determines the degree with which the firm can influence price. In the case of oligopoly, there are so few firms that that price controls becomes possible. However, the certain number of firms in the market invites complex pricing strategies, collusion, price leadership, and dominant firms, and other pricing strategies can result. The degree to which market structures can evolve into another and the difference between the potential short-run outcome and the long-run equilibrium conditions depends on the strength of the barriers to entry and the possibilities that firms fail and recoup their original cost or lose money for an extended period of time and are therefore forced to exit the market. Barriers to entry can result from very large capital investment requirements, as in the case of petroleum refining. Barriers may also result from patents, as in the case of some electrical products and drug formulas. Other entry considerations is the possibility of high exit costs. For example, plants that are specific to a specific line of products, such as aluminum smelting plants, and non-redeployable, and exit costs will be high without a liquid market for the firm's assets. High exit costs deter entry and are therefore also considered barriers to entry. In the case of farming, the barriers of entries are low production of corn, soybeans, wheat, tomatoes, and other products are easy to process and replicate. Therefore, these are highly competitive markets. Non-price competition dominates these market structures with product differentiation is crucial. Therefore, monopolistic competition relies on competitive strategies that may not include pricing changes. An example of non-pricing competition of products is through marketing. In other circumstances, non-price competition may fear retaliatory price changes that would reduce total revenue for all of the firms in the market. Because oligopoly industries has so few firms, each firm feels dependent on the pricing strategy of the other. Therefore, known price discrimination becomes a dominant strategy. From the perspective of the owners of the farm, the most desirable market structure is that which the most control over the price, because the price can lead to large profits. monopoly and oligopoly markets offers the greater potential over price. A monopolistic competition offers less control. Firms operating under perfect competition, perfectly competitive market conditions have no control over price. From the consumer's perspective, the most desirable market structure is that with the greatest degree of competition. Because prices are generally lower, thus consumers would prefer as many goods as services as possible to not be offered by competitive markets. As often happens in economics, there is a trade-off. While perfect competition gives the largest quantity of goods at lowest prices, the other markets forms may spur more innovation. Specifically, there may be high costs in researching a new product, and firms will incur such costs only if to expect to earn attractive return on their research investment. This is the case often made for medical innovations. For example, the cost of clinical trials and experiments to create new medicines will bankrupt perfectly competitive firms, but may be acceptable in an oligopoly market structure. Therefore, consumers can benefit from less than competitive markets. Okay. Perfect competition is characterized by the 5 conditions presented in Exhibit 1 above, or below in this case. There are a large number of potential buyers and sellers. The products offered by the sellers are virtually identical or indistinguishable. There are few or easily surmountable barriers to entry or exit. Sellers have no market pricing power. Non-price competition is absent. Well, few market achieves the distinction between perfect competition. It is useful to establish the outcome associated with the market structure and a benchmark against which and a benchmark against which other market structures can be compared. The most typical example of perfect competition is found in certain aspects of the agriculture industry, such as the large number of farmers growing corn and animal feed. Corn is the primary source of food for pork, beef, and poultry production. A bushel of corn for Farmer Brown is virtually identical to a bushel of corn from Farmer Lopez. If a hog farmer needs corn to feed his hogs, he does not matter whether the corn comes from Farmer Brown or Farmer Lopez. Furthermore, the aggregate corn market is well defined, which active futures are spot markets. Information about the corn market is easy and expensive to access, which is perfect information, which is important for perfect competitions. Agribusiness is capital intensive, but where arable land is relatively abundant and water is available, the barriers of entry, e.g. capital and enterprise for corn production, are relatively low. 3.1 Demand analysis in perfect competitive markets. The price of homogeneous products sold in a competitive market is determined by the demand and supply. In the market, economists usually represent demand and supply in the market through demand and supply curves. In a 2-axis plane, the quantity and price are shown on the x-axis and y-axis respectively. Economists believe that demand functions have negative slopes, as shown in Exhibit 2. That is, at high prices, less in demanded for normal goods and services. As the price declines, the quantity demanded increases. Okay, so it has an inverse relationship between the price and quantity demanded. The concept is based on the 2 effects. The income effect and the substitution effect. The income effect results from the increasing purchase power of consumers. When prices fall, with lower prices, consumers can afford to purchase more of the product. The substitution effect comes from the increasing attractiveness of a lower priced product. If soybean price are unchanged and corn prices decrease, hog farmers will substitute corn for soybeans or feed for their animals. So here's what the demand curve looks like. Assuming the demand for the function looks like this, and it looks like that, yeah. Note, and there's some average revenue stuff. Note that AR function is identical to the market demand function. This assumption here is that the relationship between the price and quantity demanded is linear. Clearly, there may not be a case in the real market. Another simplifying assumption made is that the price So that the price of the product is the only determinant of demand. Again, that is not likely in the real market. For example, economic theory suggests that consumer income is another important factor in determining demand. The prices of related goods and services, such as substitutes and complements, are also considered factors affecting demand for a particular product. Marginal revenue, MR, is the change in total revenue per extra increment sold. When the quantity sold changes by a small increment, delta QD, substituting this will give us this. Okay, so here's some calculations. Elasticity of demand and its relationship. Wait, is this even the right? Yeah. Okay. Elasticity of demand with relation to perfect competition. Consumer correspond differently or respond differently to changes in price of different kinds of products and services. The quantity demanded for some products is very price sensitive, while other products price changes result in little changes in the quantity demanded. Economist refers to this relationship between the price and change in quantity as price sensitive. Understanding the sensitivity of demand changes, the changes of price is critical to understanding the market structure. Price elasticity of demand measures the percentage change in the quantity demanded given the percentage change in the price of the given product. Because the relationship of demand to price is negative, the price elasticity of demand will be negative. Many economists, however, present the price elasticity in absolute values so that the price elasticity has a positive sign. We will follow that convention. However, price elasticity indicates that consumers are really responsive to changes in price. Lower values of price elasticity implies that consumers are not very responsive to price changes. Price elasticity can be measured with the following relationship. Okay. Price elasticity of demand falls into three categories. Where demand is very responsive to price changes, that it is identified as elastic. When demand is not responsive to price changes, is identified as inelastic. When percentage change in quantity demand is exactly the same as percentage change in price, the demand is called unitarily elastic, as illustrated right here. Price elasticity of demand depends on several factors. Price elasticity will be higher if there are many close substitutes of the product. If a product has many goods alternative, consumers will be more sensitive to price changes. For example, carbonated beverages, soft drinks have many close substitutes, and it takes a strong brand loyalty to keep consumer demand high in the soft drink market. When one brand's price is strategically lower, the price elasticity of demand of Coca-Cola has been estimated to be 3.8. For products with numerous close substitutes, demand is highly elastic. For products with a few close substitutes, demand is lower in price elasticity and would be inelastic because only very wealthy people are expected to buy them. The demand for economy tickets is elastic because typically consumers of this product is more budget conscious. Consumers do not consider economy airline tickets a close substitute to first class accommodations, particularly on long flights, especially consider how expensive long flights, first class tickets could be. The airline ticket example introduces another determination of price elasticity of demand. The greater share of the consumer's budget spent on the item, the higher the price elasticity of demand. Expensive items such as durable goods, e.g. refrigerators and televisions, tend to have higher elasticity measures, while less expensive items such as normal salt consumption of the price of the salt. Instead, they will buy their next package of salt when they run out, with very little regards to the price changes. The airline tickets also make a good example of the final factor determining price elasticity. Price elasticity of demand also depends on the length of time in which the demand schedule is being considered. Holiday airline travels is highly price elastic. I feel like I read this already. There are two extreme cases of price elasticity of demand. One extreme is the horizontal demand schedule. This term implies that at a given price, the response in the quantity demand is infinite. This is the demand schedule faced by a perfectly competitive firm because it is a price taker, as in the case of a corn farmer. If the corn farmer tries to change a higher price than the market price, nobody would buy her products. On the other hand, if the farmer has no incentive to sell at a lower price because she can sell all she can produce at the market price in a perfectly competitive market, the quantity supplied by an individual firm has no negligible effect on the market price. In the case of the perfect competition elasticity, that measures to EP equals infinity. The other extreme of the vertical demand schedule, the vertical demand schedule implies that some fixed quantity is demanded regardless of price. An example of such demand is the diabetic consumers which need a certain amount of insulin. If the price of insulin goes up, the patient will not consume less of it. The amount desired is set by the patient's medical conditions. The measure of perfect price elasticity and the nature of the elasticity curriculum and the nature of the elasticity calculations and consumer behavior in the market implies that for virtually any product excluding classes of perfect elasticity and perfect inelasticity, demand is more elastic than So here's exhibit 3 showing some data and its elasticity. 3.1.2 other factors affecting demand. There are 2 important factors that influences shifts in consumer demand. One influential factor is consumer income, and the other is the price of related products for normal goods. As consumers' income increases, the demand increases. The degree of which consumers respond to higher increases in this is called the income elasticity of demand. We've talked all about this actually, and I have also made video on the XED, YED, and PED. Okay, so I'm gonna skip that part. 3.1.3, a consumer surplus, value minus expenditure. At this point, we have discussed the fundamentals of supply and demand curves and explained a simple model of how a market can be expected to arrive at an equilibrium combination of price and quantity. While it is certainly necessary for the analysts to understand their basic workings and the market model, it is also crucial to have a sense of why we might care about the nature of the equilibrium. In this section, we review the concept of the consumer surplus, which is helpful in understanding and evaluating business practicing strategies. Consumer surplus is defined as the term between the value of the consumer places on the unit purchase and the amount of money that was required to pay for them. To get an intuitive feel for the concept of consumer surplus, consider the last thing you purchased. Whether it was, think how much. Whatever it was, think of how much you actually paid for it. Now contrast that price with the maximum amount you would have been willing to pay rather than go without the item altogether. If those two numbers are different because marginal value curve. Here's some examples. Supply analysis. Some more examples. I've actually all made videos on this in my previous IB investment banking course. If you have questions, you guys could go there, and you can also leave your questions down in the question section below. But I'm not going to continue reading this section because of how easy it is. I'm just going to stop it, and I hope to see you guys tomorrow, where we'll be going into monopolistic competition. Okay, good night. All right. Okay, monopolistic competition, one of the market structures of theory of the firm. Continued reading of the CFA Level 1 program curriculum reading. In the early 20th century, economists began to realize that most markets did not operate under the conditions of perfect competition. Many market structures exhibit characteristics of strong competitive forces. However, other distinct competitive factors played important roles in the market, as The name implies monopolistic competition is a hybrid of the most distinctive factors of monopolistic competition is a product differentiation. Recall the characteristics from Exhibit 1. There are large numbers of potential buyers and sellers. The product offered by each seller are closely substitutes for other offers, but by other firms. But each firms try to make its product look different. Entry into and exit from the market are possible with fairly low costs. Firms have some pricing powers. Suppliers differentiate their products through advertising and other non-price strategies. Well, the market is made up of many firms that compose the product group. Other producers attempt to distinguish its product that of the others. Product differentiation is accomplished in a variety of ways. For example, consider the wide variety of commercial devices available today. Decades ago, when each communication market was controlled by a regulated single seller, the telephone company, all telephones were alike. In the deregulated market of today, the variety of physical styles and colors is extensive. All versions are accomplish many of the same tasks. These communication devices manufacturers differentiate their products with different colors, styles, network bundles, bundle applications, conditional contracts, functionality, and more. Advertising is usually the avenue pursued to convince consumers there is a difference between the goods in the product group. Successful advertising and trademark branding results in customer loyalty. A group example is the brand loyalty associated with Harley-Davidson's motorcycles. Harley-Davidson consumers believe their motorcycles are truly different and better than all other motorcycles. The same kind of brand loyalty exists for many fashion creators and cosmetics. The extent to which a product is successful in product differentiation determines the price power of the market. Very successful differentiation results in a market structure that resembles a single seller market, a monopoly. However, because there are relatively low entries and exit costs, competition will, in the long run, drive prices and revenues down towards an equilibrium similar to perfect competition. Thus, the hybrid market displays characteristics found in both perfectly competitive and monopoly markets. 4.1 Demand analysis in monopolistically competitive markets. Because each good sold in the product group is somewhat different from others, the demand curve for each firm in the monopolistic competition market structure is downward sloping at the right. Price and quantity demanded are negatively related. Lowering the price will increase the quantity demanded, and raising the price will decrease the quantity demanded. There will be ranges of prices within which demand is elastic, or lower prices at which demand is inelastic. Example 11 illustrates the demand, marginal revenue, and cost structures facing a monopolistically competitive firm in the short run. So that's what it looks like in the short run. Now, the long run is going to be a little bit different. In the short run, the profit maximizing choice is the level of output, where MR equals MC, because the product is somewhat different from that of the competitors. The firm can charge the price determined by the demand curve. Therefore, in Exhibit 11, Q1 is an ideal level of output, and P1 is the price consumers are willing to pay to acquire that quantity. Total revenue is the average of the rectangle P1 multiplied by Q1. Supply analysis in monopolistically competitive markets in perfect competition. The firm's supply schedule is represented by the marginal cost schedule. In monopolistic competition, there is no well-defined supply function. The information used to determine the appropriate level of output is based on the intersection of MC and MR. However, the price that will be charged is based on the market demand schedule. The firm's supply curve should measure the quantity the firm is willing to supply at various prices. The information is not represented by either marginal cost or average cost. Optimal price and output in monopolistically competitive markets. As seen in section 4.1, in the short run, the non-profit maximizing choice is the level of output where MC equals MR. The total revenue is the area of the triangle P1 multiplied by Q1 in Exhibit 11. The average cost of producing Q1 units of the product is C1, and the total cost of the area of the triangle is this. The difference between TR and TC is the economic profit. The profit relationship is described as such, where pi is equal to the profit, TR is the total revenue, and TC is the total cost. Factors affecting long-run equilibrium in monopolistically competitive markets, because TC includes all costs associated with production, including opportunity costs. Economic profit is a signal to the market, and that signal will attract more competition, just as will the perfectly competitive market structure. The relatively low entry costs, most firms will enter the market and lure some consumers away from the firms making an economic profit. The loss of consumers to new entrants firms will drive down the demand for all firms producing similar products in the long run. For the monopolistic competition firm, economic profit will fall to zero. Exhibit 12 illustrates the conditions of long-run equilibrium in monopolistic competition. So they're just going to break even. So the economic profit is going to equal zero. Because new firms will take away supernormal profits, and firms will leave the market when there are subnormal profits. In the long-run equilibrium, output is still optimal at a level where MC equals MR, which is Q1. In Exhibit 12, again, the price consumers are willing to pay for any amount of their product is determined from the demand curve. The price is P1 for the quantity, Q1. In Exhibit 12, the total revenue of the is the area of the rectangle P1 multiplied by Q1. Notice that unlike long-run equilibrium and perfect competition in the market of monopolistic competition, the equilibrium position is at a higher level of average cost than the level of output that maximizes average cost. Average cost does not reach its minimum level of output that minimizes average cost. Average cost does not reach its minimum output of level Q2 is achieved. Total cost in this long-run equilibrium position is the area of the rectangle C1 multiplied by Q1. Economic profit is the total revenue minus total cost. In Exhibit 12, economic profit is zero because total revenue equals total cost. P1 multiplied by Q1 equals C1 multiplied by Q1. In the hybrid market monopolistic competition, zero economic profit in long-run equilibrium resembles perfect competition. However, the long-run level of output Q1 is less than Q2, which corresponds to the minimum average cost of production and will be the long-run level of output in a perfectly competitive market. In addition, the economic cost in monopolistic competition includes some costs associated with product differentiation, such as advertising. In perfect competition, there are no costs associated with advertising or marketing because all products are homogeneous. Prices are lower and customers have very little variety. Let's see at the moment we have the CFA 1. I did teach monopoly. I did teach about the oligopoly market structure in our previous economics lectures, but I don't know how the CFA is going to teach it. Interesting to see. An oligopoly market structure is characterized by only a few firms doing business in a relevant market. The products are all to be similar and to a great extent be substitutes for one another. In some oligopoly markets, the goods or services may be differentiated by marketing and strong brand recognition, as in the markets for breakfast cereals and for bottled or canned beverages. Other examples of oligopoly markets are made up of homogeneous products with little to or no attempts at product differentiation, such as petroleum and cement. The most distinctive characteristic of oligopoly markets is the small number of firms that dominate the market. There are so few firms in the relevant market that their pricing decisions are interdependent. That is, each firm's pricing decision is based on the expected retaliation by the other firms. Recall from Exhibit 1 the characteristics of oligopoly markets. There are a small number of potential sellers. The products offered by each seller are close substitutes for the products offered by other firms and can be differentiated by brand or unbranded. Entry into market is difficult, with fairly high costs and significant barriers to competition. Firms typically have substantial pricing power. Products are highly differentiated through marketing features and other non-price strategies. Because there are so few firms, each firm can have some degree of pricing power, which can result in substantial profits. Another byproduct of oligopoly market structure is the attractiveness of price collusion. Even without price collusion, a dominant firm may easily become the price maker in the market. Oligopoly markets without collusion typically have more sophisticated pricing strategies. Examples of non-colluding oligopolies include the U.S. tobacco market and the Thai beer market. In 2004, 4 firms control 99% of U.S. tobacco industry, brand owned by Xinhua Corporation, and the Thai Bev control over 90% of the Thai beer market. In 2009. This situation is expected to change soon, as the Association of Southeast Asian Nations trade agreement will open doors to competition from other ASEAN producers. Perhaps the most well-known oligopoly market with collusion is the OPEC cartel, which seeks to control prices of the petroleum market by fostering agreements among oil-producing countries. 5.1 Demand analysis and pricing strategies in oligopoly markets. Oligopoly markets' demand curve depend on the degree of pricing interdependence in the market where collusion is present. The aggregate market demand curve is divided up by the individual production participants. Under no colluding market conditions, each firm faces an individual demand curve. Furthermore, non-colluding oligopoly market demand characteristics depend on the pricing strategies adopted by participating firms. There are 3 basic pricing strategies: pricing independence, the Cournot assumptions, and the Nash equilibrium. The first pricing strategies is to assume pricing interdependence among the firm and the oligopoly. A good example of the situation is any market where there are price wars, such as the commercial airline industry. For example, flying out of the Atlanta, Georgia hub, Delta Airlines and AirTran Airways jointly serve several cities. AirTran is a lower cost carrier and typically offers lower fees to destinations out of Atlanta. Delta tends to be to match the lower fares for these cities, also served by AirTran, where the departure and arrival time are similar to its own. However, where Delta offers services to some cities, different time slots, Delta's ticket prices are higher. The most common pricing strategy assumption in these price wars market is that competition will match a price reduction and ignore price increases. So our game theory comes into play. The logic is that by lowering its price to match a competitor's price reduction, the firm will not experience a reduction in consumer demand. Conversely, by not matching the price increase, the firm stands to attract consumers away from the firm that raised its price. The oligopolist demand relationship between must represent the potential increase in market share with rival price increases are not matched, and no significant changes in market shares when rivals' price decreases are matched. Given a prevailing price, the price elasticity of demand will be much greater, and the price if the price is increased, less if the price is decreased. The firm's consumers are more responsive to price increases because its rival have lower prices. Alternatively, the firm's consumers are less responsive to decreases because its rivals will match its price changes. This implies that the oligopolistic firms faces 2 demand structures, one associated with price increases and another relating to price reductions. Each demand function will have its own marginal revenue structure as well. Considering the demand and marginal revenue functions in Exhibit 13A, the function D, increasing dP, or and MRP represents the demand and marginal revenue schedules associated with higher prices, while the function dP and MRP represents the lower prices demanded and marginal revenue schedules. These two demand schedules intersect at the prevailing price, i.e., the price where price increases and price decreases are both equal to 0. So this is a kinked demand curve. It's a little bit different than how I used to draw it in my university econ class. But yeah, you could kind of see how it's like that. The oligopolistic, okay, so that's not kinked. Right here, 13B is kinked. Okay, the oligopolistic pricing strategy results in a kinked demand curve, with the two segments representing the different competitor reactions to price changes. The kinked in the demand curve also yields the discontinuous marginal revenue structure, with one part associated with the price increase segment of demand and the other relating to the price decrease. Okay, should be quite straightforward. Notice in example 13B that a wide variety of cost structures are consistent with the prevailing price. If a firm has relatively low marginal cost, MC1, the profit maximizing pricing rule established earlier, MC equals MR, still holds for the oligopolistic firm. Marginal cost can rise MC2 to MC3 before the firm's profitability is challenged. If the marginal cost curve MC2 passes through the gap in the marginal revenue, the most profitable price and output combination remains unchanged as the prevailing price of the original level of output. Criticisms to the kinked demand curve analysis focuses on its inability to determine what the prevailing price is from the outset. The kinked demand curve analysis does help explain why stable prices have been observed in oligopoly markets and therefore a useful tool for analyzing such markets. However, because it cannot determine the original prevailing price, it is considered an incomplete pricing analysis. The second pricing strategy was first developed by French economist Augustin Courant in 1838. The Cournot assumption: each firm determines its profit maximizing production level by assuming that the other firm's output will not change. This assumption simplifies pricing strategy because there is no need to guess what the other firm will do to retaliate. It also provides a useful approach to analyzing real-world behaviors in oligopoly markets. Take the most basic oligopolistic market structure in a two-firm duopoly market. In equilibrium, neither firm has an incentive to change output, given that other firms produce production level. Each firm's attempt to maximize its own profit under the assumption that other firms will continue producing the same level of output in the future. The Cournot strategy assumes that the pattern continues until each firm reaches its long-run equilibrium position. The long-run equilibrium output and prices are stable. There is no change in the price or output, which increases profit from either firm. Consider this example in a duopoly market. Assume the aggregate market demand has been estimated to be the supply function is represented by the constant marginal cost MC equals 30. The Cournot strategy solution will be such. Okay, so here's some examples of the strategy. In the Cournot strategy pricing situation, the market equilibrium price will be 170 and the aggregate output will be 280 units. This is known as the Cournot equilibrium. Differs from the perfectly competitive market equilibrium because the perfectly competitive price will be lower than the perfectly competitive output, where will be higher. In general, non-competitive markets have higher prices and lower levels of output and equilibrium when compared to perfect competition. In competition, the equilibrium is reached where price equals the marginal cost. PC is equal to MRC, which is equal to MC, which is so it looks something like that. Exhibit 14, the Cournot equilibrium in duopoly markets. In the later discussion regarding monopoly market structures, equilibrium will be established where MC equals MR. The solution is also shown in Exhibit 14. The monopolies firm's demand schedule is the aggregate market demand schedule. Therefore, the solution is MC equals MR. From the footnote 10, MC equals this and MR equals this. So when we put it together, we'll get the equilibrium. It can be shown that as the number of firms increase from 2 to 3, from 3 to 4, and so on, the output of price equilibrium positions move towards the competitive equilibrium solution. This result has historically been the theoretical basis for antitrust policies established in the United States. The third pricing strategy is attributed to one of the 1994 Nobel winner John Nash, who first developed the general concept in the previous analysis. The concepts of market equilibrium occurs when firms are achieving their optimal remuneration under the circumstances they face. In the optimal environment, the firm has no motive to change prices of output levels. Existing firms are earning a maximum return, zero economic profit, leaving no motive for entry or exit from the market. All firms in the market are producing at the output level where price equals to the average cost of production. In game theory, the set of tools that decision makers use to consider responses by rival decision makers, the Nash equilibrium is present when two or more participants in a non-cooperative game has no incentive to deviate from the respective equilibrium. Strategies after they have considered and anticipated their opponent's rational choices. Each firm anticipates that the other firm will react to any changes made by competitors. By doing so, they can, under the arcus circumstances, the firm in the oligopoly market have interdependent actions. The actions are non-cooperative, with each firm making decisions that maximize its own profit. The firm do not collude in the effort to maximize joint profit. The equilibrium is reached when all firms are doing the best they can given the actions of the rivals. So here is the Nash equilibrium in duopoly markets. So you are incentivized not to raise your prices because you're incentivized not to lower your prices because competitors will also lower their prices and nobody wins. But if you lower your prices and your competitors don't lower your prices, then you win. If you raise your prices and your competitor raise your prices, then you both win. If you raise your prices and your competitor does not raise your prices, then you lose. So this is where game theory comes into play. For example, the top left solution indicates that when both ARCCO and BATCO offers, so this is what I just said. However, the Nash equilibrium requires that firms behave in its own best interest. BATCO can improve its position by offering the product at lower prices when ARCCO is charging higher prices. In the lower left situation, BATCO maximizes its profit at $350, while ARCCO earns $500 in its best solution. It can do so only if BATCO also agrees to change higher prices. This option is clearly not in BATCO's best interest because it can increase its return from $300 to $350 by charging lowering prices. The scenario brings up the possibility of collusion if Artco agrees to share at least 51 of its 500. When both companies are charging high prices, Backco should also be willing to charge high prices. While in general such collusion is unlawful in the most countries, it remains a tempting alternative. Clearly, conditions in oligopolistic industries encourage collusion. With a small number of competitors and independent pricing behavior, collusion is motivated by several factors: increased profit, reduced cash flow uncertainty, and improved opportunity to construct barriers to entry. When collusive agreements are made openly and formally, the firms involved are called a cartel. In some cases, collusion is successful. Other times, the force of competition overpowers collusive behaviors. And there are 6 major factors that affect the chances of success of collusion. Number 1, the number and size distributions of sellers. Number 2, similarities of their products. Number 3, cost structures. Number 4, order size and frequency. Number 5, the strength of the severity of the retaliation. Number 6, the degree of external competition. Choice employed by the individual or group that shares a common goal, e.g. military units, sports teams, or business decision makers. Another prominent decision-making strategy in an oligopolistic market is the first mover advantage, or the Shackleberg model, named after the economist who first conceptualized this strategy. The important difference between the Cournot model and the Shackleberg model is that the Cournot assumes that that in a duopoly market decision-making is simultaneous, while Shackleberg assumes that decisions are made sequentially. In a Shackleberg model, the leader firm chooses the output. Okay. Optimal pricing, so just MC equals MR. Okay, and that brings us to the end. So we're gonna continue our reading in a future section, and I hope my reading has been helpful, and I hope to see you guys there for Monopoly, one of the last market structures for the theory of the firm. Goodbye. Okay, continued reading of the CFA Level 1 program curriculum, Monopoly. Monopoly market structures is the opposite end of the spectrum from perfect competition. For various reasons, there is significant barriers to entry, such that a single firm produces a highly specialized product and faces no threat of competition. There are no good substitutes for the product in the relevant market, and the market demand function is the same as the individual firm's demand schedule. The distinguishing characteristic of monopoly and the singular firm represents the market is the significant barriers of entry and exit. Exhibit 1 identifies the characteristic of monopoly markets. 1, there is a single seller of a highly differentiated product. The product offered by the seller has no close substitutes. Entry into the market is very difficult with high costs and significant barriers to competition. The firm has considerable pricing power. The product is differentiated through non-price strategies such as advertising. Monopoly markets are unusual, with a singular seller dominating the market. Power over price discrimination decisions is significant. For a single seller to achieve a monopoly power, they must be a factor that allows the monopoly to exist. One obvious source of monopoly power would be a patent or copyright that prevents other firms from entering the market. Patents and copyright laws exist to reward intellectual capital and investment in research and development. In so doing, they provide significant barriers to entry. Another possible source of market power is control over a critical resource used in production. For example, the De Beers Consolidated Mines Limited. De Beers owned or controlled all diamond mining operations in South Africa and established pricing agreements with other important diamond producers. In doing so, De Beers was able to control the price for cut diamonds for decades. Technically, De Beers was a near monopoly dominating firm rather than a pure monopoly, although its pricing procedures for cut diamonds resembles monopoly behavior. Perhaps the most common for monopolistic market powers occurs when a result of government-controlled authorization. In most urban areas, a single source of water or sewer service is offered. In this case, these services are offered by a government-controlled entity. In other cases, private companies provide the services under government regulations, such as natural monopolies. Such natural monopolies requires a large initial investment that benefits the economies of scale. Therefore, governments may authorize a single seller to provide a certain service because of having multiple sellers would be too costly. For example, electricity in most markets is provided by a single seller. Economies of scale result when significant capital investments benefit from the declining long-run average cost. In the case of electricity, a large gas-fueled power plant producing electricity for a large area is substantially more efficient than having a small diesel generator for every building. That is, the average cost of generating and delivering a kilowatt of electricity will be substantially lower for a single power station, but the initial fixed cost of building the power station and the lines delivering electricity to the home, factory, and office will be very high. In the case of natural monopolies, limiting the market to a single seller is considered beneficial to society. One water and sewer system is deemed better than a community of dozens of competitors because building multiple infrastructure for running water and sewer services would be particularly expensive and complicated. When electrical power grid supplying electricity for a community can make large capital investments in generating plants and lower the long run average cost, while multiple power grids will lead to a potentially dangerous maze of wires. Clearly, not all monopolies are in a position to make significant economic profits. Regulators such as public unity commissions in the United States attempt to determine what a normal return for the monopoly owner's investment should be, and they set price accordingly. Nevertheless, monopolists attempt to maximize profit. Not all monopolies originate from natural barriers. For some monopolists, barriers of entry do not derive from increasing returns of scale. We mentioned that marketing and brand loyalty are a source of product differentiation in monopolistic competition. In some highly successful cases, strong brand loyalty can become a formidable barrier to entry. For example, if the Swiss watchmaker Rolex is unusually successful in establishing brand loyalty so that its consumers think there are no close substitutes for its products, then the company will have a monopoly-like pricing power over its market. The final potential source of market power is licensing returns associated with network effects. Network effects result from synergies related to increasing market penetration. By achieving a critical level of adaptation, Microsoft was able to extend its market power through the network effect. For example, because most computer users know how to use Microsoft Word, therefore for firms, Word is cheaper to adopt than other programs because almost every new hire will be proficient in using the software and will need no further training at some level of market share. A network-based product service, think Facebook or eBay, reaches a point where each additional share point increases the probability that another user will adapt. These networks effects increase the volume of the potential adapters. In Microsoft's case, the network effect crowded out other potential competitors, including Netscape's internet browser, that might have led to application bypassing Windows. Eventually, Microsoft's operating system market share reached 92% of the global market. Similar situations over the financial markets. If a publicly listed share or a derivative contract is more frequently traded on a certain exchange, more participants wishing to sell or buy the security will go to the more liquid exchange because they expect to find a better price and faster execution there. 6.1 Demand analysis in monopoly markets. The monopolist's demand schedule is the aggregate demand of the product in the relevant market. Because of the income effect of the substitution effect, demand is negatively related to price. As usual, the slope of the demand curve is negative and therefore downward sloping. The general form of the demand relationship is this. The marginal revenue and a change in revenue given a change in the quantity demanded, because an increase in quantity requires a lower price, and marginal revenue schedules as steeper than the demand schedule. If the demand schedule is linear, then the marginal revenue curve is twice as steep as the demand schedule. The demand and marginal revenue relationship is expressed in Exhibit 17. Here, suppose a company operating on a remote island in a single cellar of natural gas. Demand for its product can be expressed as such. In Exhibit 17, the demand curve intercept is 100 and the slope is -2. The marginal revenue curve is Exhibit 17. Has an intercept of 800 and a slope of -4. Average revenue is this, total revenue divided by the quantity demanded. Therefore, average revenue is equal to this. Which is the same as the demand function in the monopoly market model. Average revenue, it is the same as the market demand schedule. 6.2 supply analysis in monopoly markets. A monopolistic supply analysis is based on the firm's cost structure. As in the market structure of monopolistic competition and oligopoly, the monopolist does not have a well-defined supply function, and that determines the optimal output level. The profit maximization level of output occurs when the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. MC equals MR. Assumes the natural gas company has determined that the total cost can be expressed as such. Marginal cost of total cost divided by total change in cost divided by change in quantity equals such. Supply and demand can be combined to determine the profit maximizing level of output. Exhibit 18 combines the monopolist's demand and cost functions. So this is what a monopoly graph should look like, market structure graph. In Exhibit 18, the demand and marginal revenue functions are clearly defined by the aggregate market. However, the monopolist does not have a supply curve. The quantity that maximizes profit is determined by the intersection of MC and MR. QDE, the price consumers are willing to pay for the level of output, is PE, as determined by the demand curve PE. The profit maximization level of output is MC equals MR, which is this, where profit will be maximized. The total profit equals, or total profit is symbolized through the sign of pi. Profit is represented by the difference between the area of the rectangle QDE multiplied by PE, representing the total revenue, and area of the triangle QDE multiplied by ACE, representing total cost. Monopolies and their incentives. Pause the video if you want to look at it, but this just talks about the theoretical models and some more information about monopolies. 6.3 optimal price and output in monopoly markets. Continuing the natural gas example from above, the total profit function can be solved using the quadratic formula. Another method to solve the profit function is to evaluate change in profits over change in quantities demanded and set it to equal 0. It identifies the point at which profit is unaffected by changes in output. Of course, this will give us the same result as it was founded by the equating marginal revenues to marginal costs, which is profit maximization. This monopoly will maximize profits when Q star equals 75 units of output and the price is set from the demand curve at 650. So identifying the profit maximization points. Note that the price and output combinations that maximizes profit occurs in the elastic portion of the demand curve in Exhibit 18. This must be so because marginal revenue and marginal cost will always intersect where marginal revenue is positive. This fact implies that quantity demands did respond more than proportionality to price changes. The firm can use this relationship to determine the profit maximizing price if the firm knows its cost structure and price elasticity of demand. EP, for example, assume the firm knows that its marginal cost is constant at 75, and the recent market annual analysis indicates that price elasticity is estimated to be 1.5. The optimal price is resolved as P equals 225. Exhibit 18 indicates that the monopolist wants to produce an QE and charge the price of PE. Suppose this is a natural monopoly that is operating as a government franchise under regulation. Natural monopolies are usually found where production is based on significant economies of scale and declining cost structures in the market. Examples include electric power generation, natural gas distribution, and water and sewer industries. These are often called public utilities. Example 19 illustrates such a market and long-run equilibrium. Natural monopolies in a regulated price environment. Exhibit 19, 3 possible pricing and output situations. The first is where monopolists do without regulations. The monopolist will seek to maximize profit by producing QM units of product, where long-run marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Our LRMC equals LMR to maximize profit. The economist will raise the price to the level the demand curve will accept PM. In perfect competition, the price and output equilibrium occurs where price is equal to marginal cost of producing the instrumental units of product. In a competitive market, the quantity produced will be higher, QC, and the price lower, PC. For dysregulated monopoly, the competitive solution would be unfair because at output QC at price PC would not cover the average cost of production. One possibility is to subsidize the difference between a long-run average cost (LRAC) and the competitive price of PC for each unit sold. Another solution is for the regulator to set the price where a long-run average cost equals average revenue. Recall that the demand curve represents the average revenue of the firms receives at each level of each output level. The government regulator will attempt to determine the monopolistic firm's long-run average cost and set the output of the price so that the firm receives a fair return on the owner's invested capital. The regulatory solution is output level QR with the price set as PR. Therefore, the regulatory solution is found between the unregulated monopoly equilibrium and the competitive equilibrium. 6.4 Price discrimination and consumer surplus. Monopolists can be more or less effective in taking advantage of their market structures. At one extreme, we have a monopolist that charges price and supply quantities that are the same as they would be in perfect competition. Thus, a scenario may be a result of regulations or threat of entry. If the monopolist charges more, another company could come in and price the formal monopolist out of the market. At the opposite extreme, hated by all consumers and economists, is a monopolist that extracts the entire consumer surplus, the so-called first-degree price discrimination. When a monopolist is able to charge each consumer the highest price the consumer is willing to pay, this is called price discrimination because the monopolist charges a different price to each client. How could this be? For example, monopolists know that the exact demand schedule for a consumer, and the monopolist is able to capture the entire consumer surplus. In practice, the monopolist is able to measure how often the product is used and charges the consumer the highest price the consumer is willing to pay for that unit of good. Another possibility is that public price disclosure is non-existent, so that no consumer knows what other consumers are paying. Interestingly, not every consumer is worse off in this case, because some consumers may be charged a price that is below that of perfect competition as long as the marginal revenue exceeds the marginal cost. In second-degree price discrimination, the monopolist offers a menu of quantity-based pricing options designed to induce customers to self-select based on how highly they value the product. Such mechanisms include volume discounts, volume surcharges, coupons, product bundlings, and restrictions on use. In practice, producers can use not just the quantity but also the quality, e.g. the professional grade, to charge more to consumers that value the product highly. Third-degree price discrimination happens when consumers are segregated by demographic or other trade. For example, in economics, in econometrics, software is licensed this way. A student version can handle only small data sets and is sold at a lower price. A professional version can handle very large data sets and is sold at a much higher price because corporations need to compute an estimate for their businesses and are therefore willing to pay more for the license. Another example is the airlines know a passenger who wants to fly somewhere and come back the same day are much more likely to be business people. Therefore, one-day round-trip tickets are generally more expensive than tickets with return flights at a later date or over a weekend. Price discrimination has many practical applications. When a seller has pricing power, the best way to understand how this concept works is to think of consumer surplus. As seen in this reading, a consumer may be willing to pay more for the first unit of good, but to buy a second unit, she will want to pay a lower price, thus getting a better deal for the first unit. In practice, sellers can sometimes use income and substitution effects to their advantage. Think of something you often buy, perhaps lunch at your favorite cafe. How much would you be willing to pay for a lunch club membership card that will allow you to purchase lunches at let's say half price? If the cafe could extract from you the maximum amount of amount each month that you would be willing to pay for the half price, then it would be successful, having removed the income effect from you in the form of monthly fixed fees. Notice that the downward sloping demand curve implies that you will end up buying more lunches each month than before you purchased the discount card, even though you would be no better or worse off than before. This is a way that sellers are sometimes able to extract consumer surplus by means of creative pricing schemes. It's a common practice among big box retailers, sports clubs, and other users of so-called two-part tariff pricing, as in the example below. So price discrimination. This is an example of price discrimination, calculating price discrimination. 6.5 factors affecting long-run equilibrium in monopoly markets. The unregulated monopoly market structure can produce economic profit in the long run. In the long run, all factors of production are variable, where in the short run, some factors of production are fixed. Generally, short-run factors that is fixed is the capital investment, such as the factory, machinery, production technology, available arable land, and so forth. The long-run solution allows for all inputs, including technology, to change. In order to maintain a monopoly power positions in the long run, the firm must be protected by substantial or ongoing barriers of entry in the monopoly position and the result of patents. Then new patents must be continuously added to prevent entry of other firms into the market. For regulated monopolies, such as natural monopolies, there are a variety of long-run solutions. One solution is to set the price equal to the marginal cost, P equals MC. However, that price is likely to be high enough to cover the average cost of production. As Exhibit 19 illustrates, the answer is to provide a subsidy sufficient to compensate the firm. The national rail system in the United States, Amtrak, is an example of a regulated monopoly operating with a government subsidy. National ownership of the monopoly is another situation. Nationalization of the natural monopoly has been a popular solution in Europe and other parts of the world. The United States has generally avoided this potential solution. One problem has been the arrangements. Is that once a price is established, consumers are unwilling to accept price increases, even as factor cost increases. Politically, rising prices on products from government-owned enterprises is highly unpopular. Establishing a government entity that regulates an authority monopoly is another popular solution. Exhibit 19 illustrates that appropriate decision rules. The regulators set price equal to long-run average cost, or PR, equals LRAC. The solution assures that investors will receive a normal return for the risk they are taking in the market. Given that no other competitors are allowed, the risk is lower than in a highly competitive market environment. The challenges facing the regulator is determining the authentic risk-related return and the monopolist's realistic long-run average cost. The final solution to the franchise is the monopolistic firm through a bidding war. Again, the public goal is to select the winning firm based on the price equaling long-run average cost. Retail outlets at rail stores, rail stations, and airports are concession outlets at stadiums are examples of government franchises. The long-run success of the monopoly franchise depends on its ability to meet the goal of pricing and products at a level that of its long-run average cost. Identification of market structure. Monopoly markets are there are situations where companies have pricing powers can be inefficient because producers constrain output to cause an increase in price. Therefore, there will be less of the good being consumed and it would be sold at a higher price, which is generally inefficient for a market as a whole. This is why competition laws regulates the degree of market competition in several industries in different countries. Market power in the real world is not always as clear as in the textbook examples. Governments and regulators often have difficult tasks of measuring market power and establishing whether a firm has dominant position that may resemble a monopoly. For example, in the 1990s, U.S. regulator prosecuted agricultural corporations Archer Daniels Midland for conspiring with Japanese competition to fix the price of lysine and amino acids used as animal feed additives. The antitrust actions resulted in a settlement that involves over $100 million in fines paid by the cartel members. Another example occurred in the 1970s where U.S. antitrust authorities broke up the telephone monopoly, leaving AT&T and long distance businesses, the opening that businesses to competitors and require AT&T to divest itself and local telephone companies on companies it owned. The antitrust decision brought competition, innovation, and lower prices to the U.S. telephone market. European regulators, specifically the European Commission, all have affected the mergers and monopoly positions of European corporations, as in the case of companies Roche, Rohone, and BASF, which were the center of the vitamin price fixing case, as well as non-European companies such as Intel that do business in Europe. Moreover, the merger of U.S. company General Electric and the European company Honeywell was denied by the European Commission on grounds of excessive market concentration. Quantifying excessive market concentration is difficult. Sometimes regulators need to measure whether something has not yet occurred may generally exercise market power. For example, a merger between two companies might allow the combined company to be a monopolist or quasi-monopolist in a certain market. A financial analyst hearing news about possible mergers should always consider the impact of competitive laws, sometimes called antitrust laws. That is, whether a proposed merger may be blocked by regulators in the interest of preserving a competitive market. Econometric approaches. How should one measure market power? The theoretical answer is to estimate that elasticity of demand and supply in the market. If demand is very elastic, the market must be very close to perfect competition. If demand is rigid or inelastic, companies may have market power. This is the approach taken in the cell phone case mentioned in section 3.1.2. From the econometric point of view, this estimation requires some attention. The problem is that observed price and quantity are the equilibrium values of the price and quantity and do not represent the value of either supply or demand. Technically, this is called the problem of endogeneity of the demand and supply. Therefore, to have an appropriate estimation of demand and supply, we will need to use a model of two equations, namely the equation of demand and supply as a function of price, income of the buyers, and other variables, as an equation of the supply of the supply quantity as a function of price, production costs, and other variables. The estimated parameters will then allow us to compute elasticity. Regression analysis is useful in computing elasticity but requires a large number of observations. Therefore, one may use a time series approach and, for example, look at 20 years of quarterly sales data for a market. However, the market structure may have changed radically over the 20 years, and the estimated elasticity may not apply to the current situation. Moreover, the supply curve may change as a result of a merger among large competitors, and the estimation based on past data may not be informative regarding the future state of the market post-merger. An alternative approach in a cross-sectional regression analysis, instead of looking at total sales and average prices, is a market over time, the time series approach mentioned above. We could look at sales from different companies in the market during the same year, or even a single transaction from many buyers and companies. Clearly, this approach requires substantial data gathering efforts, and therefore this estimation method can be complicated. Moreover, different specifications of the explanatory variables are, for example, using the GDP rather than median household income per capita, GDP, to represent income, may sometimes lead to dramatically different estimations. 7.2 simpler measures. To try to avoid the above drawbacks, analysts often use simpler measures to estimate elasticity. The simplest measure is the concentration ratio, which is the sum of the market shares of the largest n firms. To compute this ratio, one would, for example, add the sales volume of the largest 10 firms and divide it by the total market size, or the total market sales. This number is always between 0 and 100%. 0 is perfect competition and 100% is monopoly. The main advantage of this concentration ratio is that it is simple to compute. As shown above, the disadvantage is that it does not directly quantify market power. In other words, is a highly concentrated ratio a clear signal of monopoly power? This analysis of entry in section 2 explains clearly that this is not the case. A company may the only incumbent in a market, but if the barriers of entry are low, the simple presence of a potential entrant might be significant to convince the incumbent to behave like a firm in perfect competition. For example, a sugar wholesaler may be the only one in the country, but the knowledge of other large wholesalers in the food industry might easily add imported sugar to the range of products, should convince the sugar wholesaler to price its product as if they were in perfect competition. Another disadvantage of the concentration ratio is that it tends to be unaffected by mergers among the top market incumbents. For example, if a largest and second largest incumbent mergers, the price power of the combined entity is likely to be larger than that of the two pre-existing companies, and the concentration ratio may not change much. So calculating the concentration ratio, we have the formula above. I don't think I have to go into this. Is this the Sydney Harbour Bridge? Why does he just have a random bridge right there? That's kind of random. To avoid the known issues with concentration ratios, economists O.C. Herfindahl and A.O. Hirsch, I'm not going to try that name, suggested an index where the market share of the top N companies are first squared and then added. If one firm controls the whole market, a monopoly, this index of HHI equals 1. If there are M firms in the industry which equals to the market shares, the HHL is equal to 1 divided by M. This provides a useful gauge of for interpreting the HHL. For example, the HHI, the index of 0.2 will be analogous, and to have the market share equally by 5 firms. The HHI of the top 3 companies in the example of the box above would be 0.225. This is why the HHI is widely used by competition regulators. However, just like the concentration ratio, the HHI does not take the possibility of entry into account, nor does it consider the elasticity of demand. As a consequence, the HHI is limited use for a financial analyst trying to estimate the potential profitability of a company or group of companies. Here's example 5, summary. In this reading, we have surveyed how economists classifies market structures. We have analyzed the distinction between different structures that are important for understanding demand and supply relations, optimal price and output, and factors affecting long-run profitability. We also provided guidelines for identifying market structures in practice. Among our conclusions are the following. Economic market structures can be grouped into 4 categories: perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. Categories differs on the following characteristics. The number of producers is many in perfect and monopolistic competition, few in oligopoly, and 1 in monopoly. The degree of product differentiation, the pricing power, of the producer, the barriers to entry in the new producers, and the level of non-price discrimination, e.g. advertising, are all low in perfect competition, moderate in monopolistic competition, and high in oligopoly, and generally highest in monopoly. A financial analyst must understand the characteristics of market structures in order to better forecast a firm's future profit stream. The optimal marginal revenue equals marginal cost. However, only in perfect competition does this marginal revenue equal price. In the remaining structures, price generally exceeds marginal revenue because a firm can sell more units only by reducing the per unit price. The quantity sold in is highest in perfect competition. The price is perfect competition. The price of perfect competition is usually lowest, but this depends on factors such as demand elasticity and increasing returns to scale, which may reduce the producer's marginal cost. Monopolists, oligopolists, and producers in monopolistic competition attempt to differentiate their products so that they can charge higher prices. Typically, a monopolist sell a smaller quantity of higher prices. Investors may benefit from being shareholders of monopolistic firms that have large margins and substantial substitute cash flows. Competitive firms do not earn economic profits. There will be a market compensation for the retail of the capital and management services, but the lack of pricing power implies that there will be no extra margins. While in a short firm or the short run firms in any market structures have economic profits, the more competitive a market is and the lower the barriers of entry, the faster the extra profits will fade. In the long run, new entries shrink margins and push the least efficient firms out of the market. Oligopoly is characterized by importance of strategic behavior. Firms can't change its price, quantity, quality, and advertisement of the product to gain an advantage over their competitors. Several types of equilibriums, e.g., for example, Nash, court knot, kinked demand curve may occur that affects the likelihood of each of the incumbents and potential entrants of the long run have economic profits. Price wars may be started to force worker competitors to abandon the markets. Measuring market power is complicated. Ideally, econometric estimates of the elasticity of demand and supply should be computed. However, because of this lack of reliable data and the fact that elasticity changes over time, so that the price data may not apply to the current situation, regulators and economists often use simple measures. The concentration ratio is simple, but with HHI, with little more computed required, often produces a better figure for decision making. Here are the references. Okay. So I believe this is chapter 15 about theory of the firm market structures. Our next reading, we finish the theory of the firm, and we are going to move into aggregate output prices and economic growth. So I do hope my readings have been helpful, and I hope to see you guys in our next reading, and goodbye.